Hello. Today I'm going to talk about the four elements practice. So, and I've been asked to talk on this a lot. So I'm glad that I'm finally getting around to putting something out there that's on this practice that really isn't very well known or very commonly practiced. It kind of has, uh, in some ways, gone into a bit of obscurity as it got superseded by the Vipassana that is really based on the four foundations of mindfulness. So it's good to, have this as a complement to another way of doing Vipassana. And we'll do a short 5-minute meditation just to get a little taste of one of the aspects of the four elements, and then I will give a talk on what the practice actually is. So go ahead and find a comfortable posture that's also upright so that our attention can be present and not fading out. If our body is droopy, our attention's going to be droopy. So we want to be both upright and also relaxed. And that's how we want to approach our actual sitting practice as well. So in this practice, I'm going to ask you to do something that you probably may have done lots of times in meditation, which is to feel the rising and falling of the belly as your breath comes in. And really, that's all we'll be doing is feeling the rising and falling of the belly. This is commonly done in Vipassana practice. And if your attention wanders, just bring it back. So I'll be silent now for about 5 minutes and then ring the bell when we're finished. Okay, so what is the four elements practice? And this is really it's Vipassana. In some lineages and historically, Vipassana was this practice, not the Vipassana that we know, most of us know currently. And so what happened with that? And just to say that there is a chapter in my book, Practicing the Jhanas, on the four elements. And also, of course, Pawak Sayadaw in his book, Knowing and Seeing, which is also available on my website for purchase and on Amazon, gets into the four elements pretty extensively. And it's in the classical text. If you want to know where, get Knowing and Seeing, and Pawak references all of that extensively. He's quite a celebrated scholar, as well as being a very deep practitioner. So, four elements was Vipassana, and it's harder to do. It's a little more abstract. And at one point, Mahasi Sayadaw's cousin, along with many, many other people, this was a long time ago, was having a hard time meditating. And Mahasi Sayadaw simplified four elements down to one aspect of the wind element, the air element, which is called pushing, which is what we're noticing in the rising and falling of the belly. That's really when we're doing mindfulness of breath at the belly. It's really the air element, the wind element, being noticed as it is coming in and out of the body. And that made it a lot easier to notice, because pretty much everybody can notice that. I mean, you don't need a lot of attention or concentration to be able to notice that, which is wonderful. I mean, I'm so happy that Mahasi Sayadaw did that, because it kind of revitalized Vipassana, and that became sort of the anchor for the mindfulness of the body as we know it. So this is actually written in his Progress of Insight. It's a footnote on the back of one page where he notes this. I was so delighted to find that at one point. But the way it's really the main place that I know of that it's taught now, is in the Pawak lineage, which is the lineage I was authorized in. And Pawak really uses this as the first very big chunk of Vipassana to analyze materiality, which means all of the things in the physical universe, and mentality, which means our thoughts. So really the four elements is analyzing materiality. There's other practices in the Pawak lineage that are done for mentality. So it's really not taught that I know of in other lineages. I mean, maybe there are some obscure places where it's taught, but it's really gone into obscurity, even though, if you look at the text, it was a very big part of Vipassana at one time historically. And the way Pawak teaches this, you have Vipassana, which, again, in my book, I have the whole arc of all of the practices done in samatha, which is, again, to go through the four categories of meditation that I teach, and that are basically what's in Buddhism and are what is being studied mostly in neuroscience. We have the heart practices, the Brown Viharas and bodhicitta in Tibetan Buddhism. We have focused attention practices, which bring the mind stream together with one object, and that includes anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, all of the jhanas, the kasinas, which are objects that we create an image of in the mind and become an object. And then in Buddhism, the heart practices are part of this path because they have the capacity for jhana. And then there's practices called the four protective meditations, which are also in the book. And then at the very end, we go into four elements. And once a certain phenomena happens, then that is considered the beginning of Vipassana. And the way Pawak differentiates that is that when you're analyzing basic materiality, that is Vipassana, because we're investigating. So really the difference between as categories, so the open monitoring is the third category of meditation, where we're taking in whatever's arising and passing, and we're investigating it. In samatha, we're really not using the investigation faculty of consciousness as much as the serenity and the one-pointedness. That's really what's emphasized in the focused attention. Open monitoring, we're then including everything and being curious about, what is this reality thing? And then because we have the focused attention, we have a powerful awareness that can actually investigate these things. If we go straight to Vipassana, the way Apawak teaches it, it's just, we don't have the level of concentration to really investigate adequately. So that's why the Buddha taught samatha first, because it would help people's mind stream get purified from the defilements, from the things that take us off of our object, and then having a power to actually do 4 elements. But we could start with 4 elements even without that, and it can still be beneficial, just like Vipassana as it's taught mostly in the like Spirit Rock IMS lineage, and in the Mahasi and Thai forest traditions, is more based on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And that's how I teach Vipassana as well, because I think it's really effective. I think it's a great practice. So I'm just situating this for you in the Pawak lineage so you can understand how it's different and what it's doing. What are the benefits of doing it? So the 4 elements, and again, this is all outlined in the chapter in my book, are earth, water, fire, and air. And these are considered to be the elements that make up materiality. In Tibetan Buddhism, when they have elements, they have 5. They include space. So you could debate whether space is actually an element or not. But in Theravadan Buddhism, it's 4. Those are the 4. And that's how it is in most of the shamanic traditions as well, use these elements. So, it's something that people, before we had the kind of science that we have now with microscopes and such, this was their way of understanding materiality, which is really innovative. Given the tools they had at the time, this was a great way to understand and investigate the material world. So the way that what we're doing in this practice is we're deconstructing materiality. Basically, it's another way of deconstructing, kind of like what we do in the mindfulness of the body in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is kind of the other version of Vipassana. And we're doing that to see ultimate materiality rather than relative materiality. So the physical world, because it's impermanent and changing all the time, and ultimately has at its very deepest level a certain kind of emptiness, which we're now seeing through the quantum physics, quantum mechanics, that really even every atom is mostly space. There's not much matter there, even though it feels very dense, to us. When we really investigate it, what we've known in Buddhism for millennia is now actually being discovered in science. It's kind of doesn't work with our normal perceptions, but this is why we're cutting through our normal perceptions in any kind of Vipassana to a more fundamental level of reality. So with each element, then what we're noticing, we're investigating the direct experience of these elements. So how do we do that? So what we do is we look at aspects of the elements, certain characteristics. So like for earth, it's hardness, roughness, heaviness, softness, smoothness, and lightness. So those are considered characteristics of the earth element. Water element is flowing and cohesion. So, water flows and it binds things together. Fire element, we have basically temperature, so heat and coldness. And then air, we have supporting and pushing. And supporting is kind of a harder one, but like if you breathe in really deeply, you can feel how your body's kind of supported there. And then the pushing we've already done in the meditation. I wanted to give you a sample of that. So the way that it's taught in the POC lineage is to pair each element with its opposite. So that makes it easier to sort of contrast, like hot and cold. You know, those, when we know something's hot and then we feel like, say, your skin is warmer, but then the air on your skin feels cool. You know, that's a way that using the contrasting makes it easier to notice each of the elements because of the contrast. So this is a tool that's used when we're doing four elements initially that makes it easier. So I'll just give you the pairings. Hardness and softness are paired. So that's both an earth element. And then roughness and smoothness are paired. Again, both an earth. Heaviness and lightness are paired in earth. And okay, so that's all of earth. And then the other ones, flowing and cohesion, are, you know, flowing is like feeling the blood in the veins flowing, you know, and cohesion might be like feeling the moisture on the inside of your mouth, how it kind of makes parts of your mouth kind of stick together. You know, these are ways, direct experiences that we have in the body, in our bodies, of these different aspects, these different characteristics of each element. And then the next one is heat and cold, which I've already talked about. And the last one usually that's done is the air of supporting and pushing, because it's considered a little bit harder to be in touch with. So like hardness, you know, your teeth are really hard. So that's another way, your fingernails. That would be a way to know hardness. Or softness, we can know from just like if you push on your hand, the skin, you know, the flesh is kind of soft there. So these are direct experiences. We're not necessarily sitting there. I mean, you could feel these things when you're doing the practice, but this is how it starts, is to, you're sitting and in the meditation, you're investigating. That is one of the big characteristics of Vipassana, is that we're investigating actively. So you're feeling each of these elements and going through them. And, you know, that might take a lot of sittings to really get that down to where it's almost automatic. I mean, the first part is really kind of memorizing what the elements are, and then finding where you can actually be in touch with these directly. It's not a concept, it's a direct sort of experience of them. So that takes a while to feel like you really have that, have a good handle on it. And then you put them back into the elements. So that's where then you would, once you have the pairs pretty much down and you can access that easily, then you put them back with the elements. So all the earth would be together, all the water, all the fire, the air. I mean, the others were all together kind of anyway. And then what we do is we start noticing the element overall. So this is where having the good concentration comes. So it's a big difference from samatha. The samatha practice is so simple. I mean, if you're doing anapanasati, noticing between the upper lip and the nostril, the air flowing, you know, you're noticing, you're knowing the breath as it crosses that area. That is the technical instruction, is knowing the breath as it crosses that area. It's really simple. It's not easy to do. If you've tried it, it's hard, but it is extremely simple. And that's why samatha means both concentration and serenity. So just having this one object really brings the mind stream together in a way that is very serene and peaceful and simple. So switching then to Vipassana and the four elements, it's busy. It's really busy and fast and active. So it feels very different. I mean, people usually have a preference for one or the other, but it's good to have both. It's good to cultivate both. And even if we're doing the other kind of Vipassana, it's also, there's a lot of movement in it. We're really noticing the arising and passing is a lot. Anicca is really emphasized in Vipassana, whereas anatta is more emphasized in samatha, even though Vipassana can, of course, get to the other of the three characteristics of no self and then dukkha. So the way we get to dukkha with Vipassanas, we see that these elements are rising and passing, they're uncontrollable. So we're really seeing that at a very fundamental, minute level experientially, and we're investigating that. So then we start knowing each element, we can feel that directly as a whole element, all of these different characteristics we feel at once. So, I'm saying this, it might sound like, oh, I could never do that. You have to actually do the practice and do sittings for 30 minutes or an hour for, weeks or however long to really kind of get the hang of this. But it is doable. It is doable when you're actually practicing, just like everything. When I first, I'm teaching my week-long samatha retreat, and I tell people there's a point where your attention is glued to that area, to the breath, and they're like, no way, but then for some people, not everyone, but day 5, they experience that. So all these things, when I first heard about four elements, because I'd been doing the other kind of Vipassana with the four foundations of mindfulness for 25 years at that point. And I thought, this sounds unbelievable, but I'll try it. This has been in Buddhism for a long time. I trust the teachings. I trust the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So I did it, and everything that was, said happened. So I was surprised actually by this practice. So anyway, so that's the next stage, is we're doing them, and then we get it to where we're doing 3 rounds a minute. So you're doing earth, water, fire, air, earth, water, fire, air, where you're really experiencing them, 3 rounds of the 4 of them in 1 minute. That's what you're doing. So you can see how busy it is. This is not a serenity practice, but it can develop a certain kind of concentration that's more in the open monitoring category of meditation. So then the 4th category I didn't mention is the self-transcending. And that's practices like Dzogchen and others where we're going directly for the non-duality and for the 3 characteristics. I mean, we are in all of the categories, obviously, but those practices are a little bit more, more direct in the self-transcending category. So in the open monitoring category, it can be busier, but it does cultivate a certain kind of concentration that's more able to stay with the flow of phenomena without losing track. So that's a great capacity for off the cushion, where we're being with phenomena that are arising in our experience that are different all the time. Okay, so then the next phase is where what is called the wisdom eye gets active. So now we're getting into a more different territory that's not talked about much in modern teachings. I've never heard anyone in the Theravada Buddhism I participated in before POAC ever mention the word wisdom eye. So, but in the POAC teachings, and then, even doing the samatha with the potential for jhanas, which, isn't a capacity that everyone has, but some people do have it. The wisdom eye is also involved and active in that practice. So it's a thing. It's in classical Buddhism. The wisdom eye is in there. This isn't a new It's just nothing new, but it just hasn't been talked about much. So this is part of the next stage of the four elements, is that when the knee is thinned a lot, and I talk about the thinning of the knee in, every practice we do, one of two things is happening: either transformation of our personality material and of our sense of the me and the body being what we are. That's either being transformed, and we're getting free from our conditioning of how we see the world, or transcendence is happening where we're experiencing our deeper nature in some way that is freeing. So one of those two things is always happening, and they're both good if we know how to work with the transformation with our personality material. Now, this practice is so fast that one of the downsides of Vipassana is that there's so much going on that we may not always see our personality material as much. In Samatha, you're going to see it. It's going to be hitting you over the head, which is why the Buddha wanted people to start there. So you've got to thin out those identifications with the personality in order for this next stage to be possible. And also there has to be enough concentration. And this is why, again, the Buddha started people with samatha, so their concentration could be high enough to actually do this practice. And this is really a better practice to do on retreat. But, people do it in daily practice. And one of the side benefits that I've heard of, I haven't really felt that it benefited me that much in this way, is that it can thin out our bodily aches and pains. It can kind of prepare the body more for deeper sitting. So, that could be a side benefit, even if this next phase I'm talking about doesn't happen. Which you're not going to have this happen unless you're on retreat. Just like any other advanced phenomena in practice, it takes days or weeks or months, and maybe it won't happen depending on the person's freedom in their consciousness and the level of concentration they have to be able to do it. So I'll just tell you what happens, and this did happen in my experience, and I was shocked. So the wisdom eye arises, and it's kind of feels like it's a little bit outside the body. So it's a little bit like above and behind the body in this case when we're doing this part of this practice. I mean, normally the wisdom eye feels more internal, and I think it's actually the pineal gland, which they don't know what it does. The Tibetans tried to stick needles down through where the top of their skull meets to try and activate it to see if that would help their practice. I mean, these people were warriors, they tried everything. They experimented scientifically to see what helped their practice. And they were trying to activate the pineal gland. I don't think it helped, so they stopped doing that. But that is what I think the wisdom eye, that's where the physical mechanisms of it is, I think, more in the middle of the head. But anyway, with this one, because it's an aspect of consciousness, it's not bound by the body. And this is why in spiritual practice, we can realize non-duality, because our consciousness isn't bound by the body, and we can know what we are as beyond the edges of the body boundary. So this isn't a new idea. Any teaching that points to non-duality or even no self as part of non-duality includes the possibility of our consciousness going beyond the body. So the wisdom eye, there's what forms is similar to what is known in samatha as a nimitta, where it's like the mind stream is coming together, but with the object being feeling the four elements in the body. So this is really about the body's materiality. And it's kind of cloud-like, like we're seeing the elements, and it's starting to break down our perception of, like Poak would always talk about, the compactness of the body. And we now know this is so true through quantum physics and quantum mechanics, that every object we see is not as solid as we think it is. It's mostly space. And even the separation between objects isn't what we perceive normally. So science is totally supporting all of this, but it's not how we normally perceive things. But as we see our own bodies as the four elements, that compactness breaks down and starts looking kind of cloud-like. And we just keep doing it faster and faster. And then it kind of starts looking like a crystal, actually. And it's called the crystal body, and it becomes really hard, like a crystal, like what we would see as a crystal. And we need really, really high access concentration, or even like when I did this, which may explain why I was able to actually perceive these things. I'd already been meditating for almost 2 months, doing all the way up to up to the eighth jhana, and doing it not only with doing the first 4 with Anapanasati, but doing all of the kasinas, all 10 kasinas for 2 to 3 hours without being outside of jhana. So I had put in, I'd never calculated how many hours that would be, but it was a ridiculous amount of hours in jhanas and in high level jhanas. And then I switched to this. So you can imagine how astronomical my concentration was at that time. I mean, it was not normal. It's not what it is now, because, I had been practicing for 2 months at that level. It was pretty extraordinary. So when I did this practice, I was coming off of that, and Pawak was having me do at least 1 sitting a day all the way up to eighth jhana. So the level of concentration I was bringing to this made it not that hard, So I don't know if this is attainable without jhana, honestly. That's why Pawak has people do samatha and then switch over to this and keep the jhanas going, whatever access they have. So at some point you switch, and then we can see like the space, even in like where your hair goes into the little cells in your arm, things like that. And at some point, basically, that crystal breaks up. It just breaks up, and what is being perceived is called rupa kalapas. So these are what I think, I mean, in Buddhism, we don't use the term subatomic particles because, of course, we didn't know about subatomic particles in the day of the Buddha, but that's what it looks like. And it looks like just materiality flicking in and out of existence. To me, it looked like fireflies. Like, I'm from the Midwest, and we had fireflies, and they were just flicking in and out of existence. So what you're seeing is your own body at the level of subatomic particles flicking in and out of existence, and not as what you normally know it as. It is experienced and known as just material phenomena arising and passing away. And we know this from the body. Our whole body gets replaced like every X number of years. All of our organs get, over a period of years, replaced. So again, the science supports that this is true, but and we all know that there are microscopes where we can see these things. If you put your finger under there, you're going to see it in a different way than how we normally see it, but it's not the same as knowing it with your own consciousness. I mean, there's just something that it changes you to see that. I mean, it's a revelation, and so that was the retreat I did with Pawak. It was in the US. It was the first time he taught here. It was 2 months long. I did the whole Samatha path, and then this is what I did with the last period of time that I had, and then the retreat ended. So I had the whole Kalapas experience like the last day or 2 days before. Well, no, I think it was a little bit before that, but I didn't have time to go on and continue doing more investigation the way that it is with the way he teaches Vipassana. So that's why the book practicing the jhanas, it ends at the end of the Rupa Kalapas, because that was as far as Stephen and I got in the 2 months we had, which was kind of incredible. I mean, anyway, so really seeing the subatomic particles, the way that then one would go on is to analyze those. And this is where POAC's teaching of the Abhidhamma comes in, and how one analyzes them is all based on that. So I didn't do that. So I don't teach beyond this point. But it really affects one's perception of reality. And I'll get into this in a minute, my own understanding of this. I had a Kalapas experience before this, before I even knew about POAC or had any intention of studying with him. When I did my year-long solo retreat, I had been at home for a month, and then I went to Spirit Rock for the month long. And I came home after that for several months. And then I went to IMS for the 3 months. So I was home 8 out of the 12 months practicing on my own. And so I'd already been practicing for a month, and I went to Spirit Rock, and it was like the first week. I mean, my concentration was already so high then that I came into the retreat really, primed. And I was mainly doing Dzogchen. I mean, Dzogchen was my overarching practice for the whole year. But then I would do like a few weeks just doing Vipassana, or just doing the Brahmaviharas, or just doing what I knew as, I didn't know about the Anapanasati practice for samatha at that time. So it wasn't until 2 years later, when I went to the POAC retreat, that I learned Anapanasati from him as a way to work with the jhanas potentially. I had been doing it the way it was taught at Spirit Rock at that time, doing metta. So, just to say that. But I was doing Dzogchen, and my concentration was so high that when I switched to Dzogchen at one point, it was like the first week or the second week, I was sitting there, and there's a certain thing that happens to me sometimes, what I call it a lock-in. And it's kind of almost like a jhana for Dzogchen. I mean, I can't describe it any other way, because like the stability of the Dzogchen locks in. But I was doing that, my eyes were open, and I saw everything turning into Kalapas, everything I could perceive was Kalapas. And it was like in the movie The Matrix. It was exactly like that one scene where Neo realizes he's getting shot, and he doesn't die because he realizes he's not the body. He disidentifies from the body, which of course in the Matrix isn't real because it's a simulation. But, we have so much, this is part of the ego programming, is that we are the body, and when the body dies, we die. So he was being shot in the Matrix, which was an AI, it was a simulation. And he realized, and he didn't die. He realized that was not what he was, and everything started dissolving, just falling apart in the movie The Matrix. And it was pretty much a lot like that, except it wasn't like computer code the way they show it in The Matrix. But it was disturbing, actually. And the teacher I had, I think if I'd stayed with it, it would have normalized, just like anything that's disturbing, if you stay with it. But the teacher I had didn't want to take any chances and switched me over to metta. So I didn't get to find out what would have happened if I had stayed with that for a week or two. It would have been amazing, So just to say that there is the potential for everything being seen as Kalapas. And it changes. I mean, even for me, just having those two experiences, it changes. It changes our perception, or I'll say it changed my perception of the compactness of the solidity of materiality, and also mainly the main impact on awakening is that it changes our perception that it is what we are, that the physical is what we are. We can't, like, okay, that doesn't make any sense anymore. If these things are all just arising and passing momentarily, that's not what I am. So what am I? So this is really where in Theravadan Buddhism, that leads them to the no self, to the emptiness of the sense of self that we thought we were, that is part of the journey of awakening. And then ultimately, the way I understand these technically, no self is about us, and non-duality is about everything. So no self, in my view, is a subset of non-duality. And ultimately, we can know that everything, first of all, there's a non-separation, which again is bearing out in quantum science these days, that things aren't as separate even physically as we think they are, but underneath what's manifesting everything is coming from the absolute. So the absolute is the deepest dimension of reality as understood in Buddhism, and also, well, I'll just say that as it's understood in Buddhism, at least in Theravadan Buddhism, that's what is being pointed at with cessation. So I know this is a lot for a basic talk, but basically when we start seeing things breaking apart like that, we get that they're manifesting, and there's like, we're in touch with the force of the manifestation. So in my talks on the dimensions of non-duality, there is a dimension, there's the absolute, which is like the base of the ground of being. It's like a non-being. It's a void, but it's a void that has the potentiality for everything to manifest. So the dimension that manifests all of this, I call the logos, or you can think of it as the dynamism of being that's manifesting you sitting here right now. That dynamism is what we're actually seeing with the wisdom eye. We're seeing it manifesting in and out of existence. And so we're seeing this dimension that is the dynamism that's in a constant flow of manifesting and disappearing, and we can't, that flow is uncontrollable. I mean, right now, stop all the phenomena. I dare you. See if you can stop it. You can't stop it. Even when we're sleeping, we don't stop it. The only time it stops is in dreamless sleep, which I believe is our consciousness going back into the absolute, because if we don't go, and if someone doesn't get there for 2 weeks, they go insane. So yes, we have to go home every night, so get your sleep. And in cessation is a way that it goes there, that the ego self has to be so surrendered that it gets absorbed. I've had this experience. It gets absorbed into the ground, into the absolute, and there is no consciousness. It does feel like a death. So there is something significant about it in terms of the ego, of being non-attached to the ego self and surrendered. So that's what we're seeing when we see the kalapas coming in and out of existence. We're seeing that dynamic force of the ground of being, which in my talks on the dimensions of non-duality, I call that the logos, or the dynamism of being, that's manifesting through all the dimensions into the physical realm that we're in physically. So that's why it's significant. So just by, potentially by analyzing materiality, we're getting down to the fundamental level. So I'll do my hand demonstration that makes this understandable. I do it a lot, so you may have seen it. But like, this is our normal perception of reality. So what is that? Like, I'm here, you're here, your computer's here, my pen is here, and they're separate. And from this view of reality, that isn't false. But what happens when I take the veil of the me, or, this veil away that's obscuring a deeper reality. There's a deeper reality that is manifesting everything. And from down here, like I can feel my finger. So where does the finger really start and stop? Not so clear. But if my consciousness is down here, yes, physical things are separate. Like when this body dies, your body isn't going to die. So there's a reality to that. But our consciousness isn't bound by that. So our consciousness can perceive this deeper reality that's manifesting every single thing that we perceive, including our thoughts, emotions. Everything is coming from this deeper ground, and our consciousness can be here. And at that point, are they separate from down here? Nope, they're not. So, and there's a force that's manifesting all of this. So that's really when we see the Kalapas, we're in touch with, and we're directly experiencing that manifestation that's coming from the absolute. So it's not the same as experiencing the absolute, but it changes our perception of reality. So that's part of why they did this practice, because we're investigating. If we're investigating anything deeply enough, we can get to the absolute, because it is the ground of everything. So the 4 different practice categories are all investigating in different ways, and they're freeing the me from its conditioning in different ways. So this is what the 4 elements is doing in the category of open monitoring, because we're monitoring specific phenomena, really trying to get to the most fundamental level of reality that we can perceive. And when we perceive that, that's the potential for it to be liberating. That's insight, liberating insight. And each category has potential for liberating insights. In Samatha, it's more about anatta, about no self. In Vipassana, the doorway is anicca, because we're seeing the arising and passing, and that can then lead to anatta. And of course, dukkha is really understood as being the uncontrollability, that we can't stop the phenomena, we can't control them. So that technically, in terms of understanding the 3 basic characteristics of existence that can be liberating when we're in touch with them, we just stop trying to, have the illusion that we're controlling everything, and to have more acceptance of the flow of phenomena and not fight it so much. So that's, one angle on liberation, and the 4 elements is really pointing to that. So I hope this has been, helpful. I mean, it is a kind of obscure practice, and I don't think, like for daily life, it's not as useful, in my opinion, as the 4 Foundations of Mindfulness version of Vipassana. I think that's better for living our lives and freeing us up from patterns that make us suffer and other things. But this practice is really, it's great for the investigation into the 3 characteristics. So I've been asked over the years so many times to teach on this, and, maybe someday I'll do a retreat on the 4 elements, but I wanted to at least put it out there so that, because it's just not taught, I wanted to have it out there so people could understand it and where it came from and what it's doing. And it can be helpful, I've been told, as a daily practice that can smooth out our identification with the body, and also just body tension patterns and things. So I wish you all the best with practicing the 4 elements if you choose to do that. And I have lots of other videos on YouTube and talks on Dharma Seed. All of this is on the website at luminousmindsangha.com. So be well.